Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is September the 10th, 2024. It has been 3,879 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 202 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 199 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 36 days since Ukraine counter-invaded Russia. We had technical issues between our Ukrainian and United States offices yesterday that prevented us from producing a podcast. Thank you for your understanding. Today's podcast covers the events that happened from Friday to Tuesday morning. You will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. There is a link in the podcast description, and there are a lot of map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine war report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south, and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission: the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. The lack of a meaningful response by Ukraine's allies to open and unrestricted attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure by Russia has convinced Moscow this is an effective strategy with no political consequences. 2. Russia will maintain its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. 3. Continued attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have caused critical damage, creating an environment where an accident at one or more of Ukraine's nuclear power plants is possible. 4. The unwillingness of the Biden administration to permit Ukraine to use provided weapons for strikes more than 40 kilometers from the 1991 state border with Russia has forced Ukraine to develop its own deep strike capabilities, proving that escalation threats from Moscow are hollow. 5. The policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance and the United States, and to a small extent Germany, is a complete failure that only encourages Russian acts of aggression, including more frequent and deeper violations of NATO alliance airspace, which now extends to Latvia, and acts of espionage in Europe and North America. 6. In our assessment, the failed policies of the NATO alliance are increasing the probability of a significant international incident, nuclear proliferation, and an expansion of the Russia-Ukraine war into the European continent. 7. We maintain Russia has no strategic reserve available to mount an effective defense of the Kursk region, continues to suffer unsustainable losses, and has committed almost all of its available conventional forces in Ukraine. 8. The Kursk counter-invasion is strategically sound. 9. Autocrat Vladimir Putin's order to recapture the Kursk region of Russia by October the 1st is unrealistic and unlikely. 10. The risk of an attack on Ukraine by the armed forces of Belarus is extremely low, and this is the last day for this entry. 11. The Russian economy is much weaker than reported. 12. Persistent delays in the delivery of promised military hardware, munitions, and funding continue to prevent the Ukrainian armed forces from reaching their full combat potential. 13. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. Over the weekend, including Monday morning, Russia launched 98 Shahed-136 one-way drones, 5 Iskander-M short-range ballistic missiles, and 7 Kh-59 or 69 guided air-to-ground missiles at Ukraine. Ukrainian air defenses shot down 79 Shaheds, with 7 disabled by electronic warfare. 3 flew into Romania, 5 entered Belarus, with 1 crashing in Latvia. An additional Shahed was disabled by electronic warfare and flew into occupied Luhansk Oblast. Information about the NATO alliance and Belarusian airspace violations and the impact of drones and missiles is further in the report. The attacks, along with VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, bombings, killed 19 civilians and wounded 151. In the last 7 days, Russia has used more than 800 precision glide bombs, 300 Shaheds, and over 60 missiles of various types. Overnight, Russia launched 46 Shahed-136 one-way drones, 1 Iskander-M short-range ballistic missile, and 1 Kh-31P anti-radiation missile at Ukraine. 38 Shaheds were shot down. 3 were disabled by electronic warfare, and 3 more were deflected into Russia and occupied Luhansk Oblast. Drone strikes in the Donetsk and Kharkiv regions knocked out power to over 280,000 customers. Here is this weekend's action report summary. From Friday to Monday, Russia carried out 701 discrete assaults, including 167 on Monday. Through September the 9th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks dropped to 181. We believe that Russian forces are in a brief operational pause for consolidation, resupply and reconstitution, and the number of attacks will increase. In the Kursk region, Ukraine controls 1,264 square kilometers, with another 259 in the grey zone, for a total area of 1,523 square kilometers. The breach is 95 kilometers wide, with a depth of up to 33 kilometers. Ukraine controls 95 hamlets, villages, settlements and tactically significant areas, such as the Gazprom gas compressor and metering station at Sudzha. Of those, 33 settlements are under full administrative control. The Glushkovsky salient, where 2,500 to 3,000 Russian troops are isolated, is 560 square kilometers. Let's go into the details of what happened on the battlefield. This would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy, that's in the northeastern Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. We begin in the Kursk region of Russia, in the Glushkovsky area of operation, or AO. After Russian soldiers showed that makeshift repairs had been made to the bridge over the same river in Karish, the structure was attacked twice, with the JDMR bomb destroying the crossing. Additionally, 2 new Russian pontoon bridges built between September the 5th and the 7th north of Zvana were destroyed in separate rocket attacks. We link to all 4 videos showing the rocket attacks and bombings in our situation reports. There is a link in the podcast description and more information on how to become a subscriber. In the Korenevo AO, Russian claims that Ukrainian forces withdrew from Krasnooktyabrsky were not only false, but a new Russian video confirmed that the village is under Ukrainian control. Russian claims of Ukrainian forces no longer occupying Snagost were also false, with Russian sources sharing a video showing an airstrike on a warehouse in the settlement. Russian mercenary mail blogger Rybar claimed, without evidence, that a Ukrainian air defense system was hidden in the building. Russian sources also shared a video of a drone that flew from the north, striking an abandoned Ukrainian armored personnel carrier in the center part of Komarovka. The Russian Ministry of Defense, that's Armored, claimed there was fighting in the area of the abandoned Soviet-era village of 10th Oktyabr, but all of the evidence shared by Russian sources indicated that fighting had moved up to 4 kilometers west. Fighting continued east of Korenevo village with no change in the situation. The VKS carried out airstrikes south of Lgovka, in Vetrina, east of Alexandrovka, on the southern edge of Krymiane and south of Kalinov. the Lgov Operational Direction, or OD, the VKS bombed a Ukrainian position west of Kauchuk. The VKS also conducted at least 4 airstrikes south and southeast of Sheptuhovka, confirming the current line of conflict. Russian sources claimed a Ukrainian drone attacked Russian positions in the southern part of the settlement. Ukrainian forces remotely mined the road between Sheptuhovka and Kauchuk, and a Russian armored personnel carrier was destroyed in the minefield. This confirmed that Ukrainian forces withdrew south of Kauchuk, and based on the new intelligence, the map was adjusted. The VKS also bombed Ukrainian positions in Hitrovka, confirming a new Ukrainian advance. Based on the new intelligence, we coded Hitrovka, Novoselovka and Otradnaya as under Ukrainian control, as I suggested on Friday's podcast. Armod continues to claim there is fighting in the area of Malaya Loknya. However, Russian sources have repeatedly shown that the line of conflict is at least 4.8 kilometers away in the areas of Kamyshovka, Kamyshevka, east of Naidunov, and on the approaches to Kireyevka. In the Sudzha, Armod reported fighting in the area of Cherkasskaya Konopelka, with Russian mercenary blogger Rybar admitting that the line of conflict is east of Fanaseyevka. West of Ulanek, a Ukrainian Dragon drone attacked Russian positions, confirming our existing estimated line of conflict. Over the weekend, Russia used a rare Orion drone to fire missiles at a Ukrainian tank in Makhnovka. Russian forces continue to bomb and shell their own population, with a video showing the aftermath of an attack on Sudzha that killed 2 Russian civilians. Despite the reports from Armod of shelling Sudzha and sharing videos of the attacks, Russian propagandists blamed Ukraine for the destruction of the children's polyclinic in Sudzha. Ukrainian occupation officials have started small-scale truth and reconciliation programs, showing residents the reality of the war in Ukraine and Russia's war crimes. Viewers were left in shock, with some breaking down in tears seeing what happened in Bucha and Mariupol. In the areas under administrative control, Ukraine has established radio and TV broadcasts to the local population. Today, I have a theater-wide update for the Russian theater of war in the Kursk Oblast. Major General Aptia Laudinov has moved on from claiming that no Chechen Akhmat forces withdrew from their positions and the Ukrainian counter-invasion was stopped. Laudinov warned that Ukraine was preparing for another offensive push in the direction of the Kursk nuclear power plant, reinforcing existing Russian propaganda. In a wide-ranging interview with the British news agency The Financial Times, CIA Director Bill Burns called the Ukrainian Kursk counter-invasion, quote, a significant tactical achievement that exposed Russia's weaknesses. MI6 Chief Richard Moore called the counter-invasion a, quote, audacious and bold move. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Ukraine controls over 1,300 square kilometers of the Kursk Oblast, controls over 100 settlements, and Russian forces have suffered over 6,000 casualties, that's killed and wounded combined. In its Sunday morning report, Armod claimed that Ukraine has suffered more than 11,200 casualties, with the loss of 827 armored vehicles, 361 unarmored vehicles such as pickup trucks, SUVs and cars, 84 artillery pieces, 24 multiple launch rocket systems, including 7 M142 and 4 M270 GMLRS, among other equipment. If the numbers were factual, the surviving 800 Ukrainian troops are holding back 60,000 Russian soldiers. It also means that 31 battalions of mechanized infantry have been completely destroyed. Take all the time you need.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com@malcontentnews.
let's talk about my home, Ukraine. Let's start in the Kharkiv Oblast in the Liptsevo-Vovchansk AO. The operational tempo has slowed, with reports of fighting in the areas of Glboke, Staritsa, Vovchansk and north of Tikhe. Russian forces were geolocated in the area of the Vovchansk Central Hospital, and based on the new intelligence, we adjusted the line of conflict. In the Kupiansk AO, Ukrainian drones attacked a cellar in the southern part of Sinkivka, indicating an additional Russian advance. Fighting continued in the area of the village and restarted northeast of Petropavlivka. Russian forces made additional advances west of Peshchane and are now 6 kilometers east of the Oskil River in the area of Glushkovo. Yes, that's a growing problem. Further south, Russian attempts to advance in the direction of Lozova from occupied Novoselivske were repulsed. In the Luhansk Oblast, west of occupied Svatove, attacks in the areas of Stelmachivka, Myasozharivka and Novoyegorivka were repulsed. West of Kremenna, Russian forces carried out assaults within Makiyivka and attacked in the direction of Nevske, Novosadove and Torske without success. On Monday, Ukrainian forces repulsed a Russian assault from occupied Dibrova, and fighting restarted in the direction of Grigorivka from the Serebryansky woods. Now, let's talk about the Donbas, where we start in the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. Beginning in the Siversk AO, Russian forces maintained pressure on Ukrainian troops, carrying out 4 assaults west of occupied Zolotarivka and 5 more east of Bilogorivka and in western Spirna. Russian troops made marginal gains north of Bilogorivka. Over the weekend, Ukraine used a Dragon drone north of Vesele, that's the one northeast of occupied Soledar, showing a previously unrecorded Russian advance. Based on the new information, the map was updated. Ukrainian forces were able to partially stabilize their defensive lines in the Kostiantynivka AO. Russian forces advanced north of Kalinivka in the direction of Grigorivka and on Monday recrossed the Siversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Attacks continued in the western part of the canal district of Chasiv Yar, with Russian mercenary Melblogovo Gonzo reporting that fighting continued along the canal area. Over the weekend, Russian forces made additional gains west of Klishivka, advancing toward the canal in the direction of Predtechina. A Ukrainian Dragon drone attacked the new Russian positions. Attacks near Andriivka were repulsed, as were 2 attempts to cross the canal at Kurdyumivka in the direction of Bila Hora. In the Toretsk-New York AO, Russian and Ukrainian forces traded territorial control. Russian forces advanced on the railroad grade and Dzerzhinsky Street in Toretsk past the penal colony to a group of warehouses. Northeast of the Russian advance, assaults in Druzhba were repulsed. In southeastern Toretsk, Russian forces were pushed back from the Institution of General Secondary Education No. 2 into the forests of western Zalizne. Russian troops occupying the ruins of the Zalizne electrical substation were attempting to advance in the direction of Nelipivka. The 12th Special Operations Azov Brigade advanced further into New York, raising the Ukrainian flag in the center of the settlement. Other units were freely moving in the western part of the city, east of the Dachas. In southwestern Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces carried out 41 attacks in the Pokrovsk AO and have likely entered a brief operational pause for resupply and reconstitution. Ukrainian forces continued to defend the north flank effectively, repulsing attacks in the direction of Zelenopole, Vozdvizhenka and Myrolubivka. On Sunday, Russian forces broke through Ukrainian defenses in southern Grodivka and advanced into the center of the settlement, where they engaged in close combat with Ukrainian forces. Russian forces remain blocked in northern Novogrodivka near the area of the coal mine. Ukrainian forces continue to harass the Russian flanks, forcing Russian troops to withdraw from the Novogrodivka bridge at the railroad grade and the graveyard north of Marinivka. In Pokrovsk, Sergei Dobryak, the head of the city's military administration, said that Russian forces were now 8 kilometers away and had started to systematically destroy the city with airstrikes, short-range ballistic missiles, and artillery. Train service has ended due to the security risk of large gatherings of people at the train station, with residents being moved to Dnipro by bus. Ukrainian forces continued to hold control of Marinivka, where fighting was ongoing. The VKS destroyed the Mikhailivka railroad bridge, which has been the site of intense fighting. The debris from the bridge now blocks Centralna Street into Selidove. Fighting continued in western Mikhailivka near the coal mine complex and the residential areas west of the E50 highway. In the Kurakhove AO, Russian forces carried out 46 attacks, but made no significant progress. Ukrainian troops insisted that fighting was only happening in southern Lysivka and that Russian troops had not reached Ukrainsk, countering claims made by a respected Ukrainian source. They also reported that Ukrainian artillery units used DPICM rounds, that's cluster munitions, and Dragon drones to prevent the Russian advance. A video from September the 4th showed volunteers evacuating 9 civilians and 4 dogs from Zhelanna Persha. Some residents still refused to evacuate, forcing families to separate. Fighting continued at Dolinivka and in southern Halitsinivka. Over the weekend, Ukrainian and Russian sources claimed Ukrainian troops withdrew from Nevelske after defending the village for over 30 months. Ukrainian forces also withdrew from the north bank of the Lozova River in the northwestern part of Krasnogorivka, with Russian forces advancing up to a kilometer past the river. Ukrainian forces still control the northwestern panhandle of the settlement. Russian assaults continued in western Georgievka and central Kostiantynivka, with no change in the situation. In the Vuhledar AO, Ukrainian source Deep State reported that Vodyane had been captured by Russian forces. As our team was finishing today's script, they managed to geoconfirm the status of the village as captured by Russia. Russian forces reached the Pivdenno-Donbaska coal mine No. 1 complex for the second time, raising a flag on the mine shaft tower. Claims that Russian forces reached the Pivdenno-Donbaska coal mine No. 3, 5 kilometers away, were false. Fighting continued south of Vuhledar, north of Prechistevka, and in the area of Novodonetsk. We adjusted the line of conflict between occupied Pavlivka and Prechistevka, moving it north of Shevchenko to the T509 highway. We haven't talked about the Black Sea, occupied Crimea, Mykolaiv and Odessa for a long time. Insurgents in occupied Crimea reported a significant increase in the movement of military equipment in and out of the region. Fuel trucks were observed traveling to the fuel depot at Inkerman near Sevastopol, indicating that the Kremlin is using the much longer land bridge route from Russia through occupied Donetsk and Zaporizhia oblasts to reach the Crimean Peninsula. The logistical change was made after the August 22nd sinking of the last operational roll-on roll-off railroad car ferry at Port Kavkaz in the Krasnodar Krai of Russia. The Crimean Tatar insurgent organization Atesh shared pictures of the railroad section of the Kerch Bridge, showing that parts of the structure have started to sag due to the low-quality repairs made in 2023. Over the weekend, in the city of Mykolaiv, a Russian attack destroyed a hotel where volunteers who rescue animals were staying, killing 2 people. Additionally, on Saturday night, Russia attacked the Odessa region port at Izmail. 12 private homes and a hotel were damaged. In the port city of Vilkove, a Shahed 136 one-way drone destroyed the Delta Hotel. Things keep exploding in the parts of Russia beyond the Kursk Oblast. On Saturday, Ukrainian drones struck a large Russian ammunition depot in the village of Soldatskaya in the Voronezh Oblast. Area villages were evacuated and the large-caliber ammunition and rockets cooked off for 14 hours. The fires could be seen from outer space, and the smoke plume reached the Belgorod region. We cannot verify the claims that North Korean-sourced KN-23 short-range ballistic missiles were stored at the depot. Ukrainian drones struck the railroad fuel depot near Yutanovka in the Belgorod region, and in Nikolskaya, a Ukrainian drone struck a hangar, setting it on fire.
Офигеть! Жесть!
Overnight, over 140 drones attacked 7 regions of Russia, including Moscow. Despite Russian claims that all drones were intercepted and damage was only caused by falling debris, videos captured drones striking 2 apartment buildings. Both buildings hit suffered significant damage, as did a third in Ramenskaya, which appears to have also suffered a direct hit from a drone or errant air defense missile. Smoke from a fire was observed in Kolomna. At least 2 drones struck Zhukovsky International Airport, sparking a fire near the main terminal. Russian officials also reported that the Flight Research Institute was hit. At the time of recording, all flights were suspended. Videos also showed smoke rising from Domodedovo International Airport, where all flights were also suspended. Drone debris was on the highway in the Moscow suburb of Dydildina. Russian officials claimed that all 21 drones in the Bryansk region were shot down, with a local video showing at least one reached its target with no attempt by air defense to intercept it. Additionally, Russian sources claimed that drones targeted the Smolensk, Oryol, Lipetsk, Kaluga and Tula regions. In the Tula Oblast, local officials reported that drone debris fell on a, quote, fuel and energy complex facility, but that operations were not disrupted. There was no information about damage or casualties in any other region, with Russian officials claiming all drones intercepted. Unrelated to yesterday's drone attack, in the Orenburg Oblast, a gas pipeline at the Garshinskaya field ruptured and exploded.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers and analysts is funded by readers, listeners and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
I normally don't cover the European threat section of our situation report in the podcast, but a lot of important events happened over the weekend. On the night of September the 7th, 3 Russian drones violated Romanian airspace, with one traveling for 50 minutes and almost 70 kilometers to the Sabanjia area before reversing course back to Izmail in Ukraine. Romania scrambled for F-16s that verified the presence of the Shahed 136 and observed its flight path without intercepting. On Monday, Romanian officials confirmed that drone debris was found in the border village of Periprava. Investigators plan to search for the 3rd drone in the area of Kara-Orman, 27 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. The Foreign Minister of Romania condemned the new violation, writing on Twitter, also known as X, quote, "Criminal Russian UAVs violated Romania's airspace, targeting Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. We strongly condemn these violations and urge Russia to stop its reckless escalation. We informed allies and NATO, remaining in close coordination." North of Ukraine, a Shahed-136 traveled through Belarus, entering the airspace of NATO alliance nation Latvia, and crashed in the area of Rezekne, over 50 kilometers from the border. The commander of the Latvian National Armed Forces, General Leonids Kalniņš, confirmed that the drone that crashed near Rezekne was a Shahed with a 90-kilogram warhead. Explosive ordnance disposal engineers neutralized the warhead at the crash site. Kalniņš told reporters that, quote, "the object in question needs to meet procedures in order to be subjected to neutralization," which didn't sit well with the former state secretary to the Latvian Ministry of Defense, Jānis Garisons. In an interview with BNN News, he questioned how military leaders determined the UAV posed no threat, quote, while the drone was in the air and in Latvian airspace. NATO spokesperson Farhad Dakhlala said that there was, quote, no information indicating a deliberate Russian attack on allies, while repeating the earlier messaging from Brussels that called the airspace violations, quote, irresponsible and potentially dangerous. Latvia summoned the Russian chargé d'affaires for an explanation. "I'm sure Moscow will stop after he is yelled at." The Foreign Minister of Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis, accused the NATO alliance of inaction. Quote, "Nothing should be landing on Ukraine or Latvia or anywhere on NATO territory, but this is the new reality our inaction has allowed to emerge." The Deputy Secretary-General of NATO, Mircea Joanne, released a brief statement declaring, quote, "NATO condemns the overnight Russian airspace violation into Romanian airspace. While we have no information indicating that there is a deliberate attack by Russia against allies, these acts are irresponsible and potentially dangerous." Let's check the weekend scoreboard. Poland 0, Romania 0, Latvia 0, Belarus 2. On Sunday night, Sweden suspended operations at the Arlanda International Airport in Stockholm for over 2 hours due to airspace violations by 4 unknown drones. An unnamed Swedish official said, quote, "We suspect that it was a deliberate act, but cannot say for what purpose. For reasons of confidentiality of the investigation, we do not want to go into details." Now, let's move on to today's theater-wide update. Ukraine announced it had developed its own precision glide bomb with a range of up to 100 kilometers. It is reportedly loosely based on the French AASM Hammer and is compatible with Ukraine's Soviet-era aircraft. Ukrainian drone operators downed almost 50 Russian surveillance drones in the last week, based on geolocated videos, including Supercam and Merlin VR UAVs. Ukrainian defense contractors are working on expanding their capabilities, with 2 more phases that will be implemented in 2025. Ukrainian engineers are moving closer to having an accurate, inexpensive and economical drone that uses small arms. A new drone using an AK-74 to provide close air support has been introduced, which is less technically complex than other drones with turret systems. Ukrainian forces have also increased the number of remotely controlled machine gun turrets on the front lines controlled by Steam Deck. First field tested in late 2023, the systems have proven effective while enabling operators to stand off from the forwardmost line of friendly troops. The United States, Europe and Ukraine are working on developing a substitute for the S-300 air defense and R-27 air-to-air missile as Ukraine's inventory dwindles. The program was announced on Friday in Germany, with no specifics or timeline given. Ukraine's allies' failed policies of escalation management have one former Ukrainian official saying the obvious aloud. The former Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration, Oleg Rybachuk, suggested that Ukraine would be forced to restart its Soviet-era nuclear weapons program if the West and NATO do not fulfill their obligations. Quote, We can technically and realistically start production, somewhat reminiscent of Israel, which said that they do not have nuclear weapons, but if necessary, we will launch an appropriate nuclear attack on the aggressors. CIA Director Burns said that in late 2022 there was a real probability of Russia using a tactical nuclear weapon against Ukraine, and the United States engaged in a, quote, flurry of diplomatic activity. Long-time listeners may remember in October 2022 we expressed our deepest concern about the mutually assured destruction and stability paradox. After Russia illegally annexed the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts, we indicated that there was a remote chance of a demonstration attack on Bakhmut, which Ukraine still controlled at the time. Burns called Putin a bully who will continue to saber-rattle, and during 2022 was warned what the consequences would be if Moscow used a tactical nuclear weapon. Despite the threats, here is what Burns had to say.
The president sent me to talk to, one of our Russian counterparts, Sergei Narishkin, at the end of 2022 to make very clear what the consequences of that kind of escalation would be. And we've continued to be very direct about that. So I don't think we can afford to be intimidated by that saber-rattling or bullying. We've got to be mindful of it. But
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz called for the acceleration of reaching a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, adding that any future negotiations should include representatives from the Russian Federation. Russian autocrat Vladimir Putin, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov and the Russian Foreign Ministry have all declared that negotiations are impossible after Ukraine launched its counter-invasion on August 6th. The Minister of Defense of the Netherlands, Ruben Brekelmans, told Radio Svoboda that at no point will Ukraine's allies sufficiently support their fleet of F-16s. He restated that the Netherlands and many countries support providing Ukraine with the ability to strike Russia, stating that deep strikes on military targets are supported by international law. He dismissed opponents' fears of escalation or a nuclear response by Russia as, quote, not really necessary. Additionally, Brekelmans stated that the Patriot air defense system from the Netherlands would arrive in Ukraine next month. Sweden announced a new $442 million military aid package to Ukraine that includes 6 combat boats and all related equipment, and $166 million in spare parts for the Saab JAS Gripen fighter aircraft. You would be correct if you're thinking, wait, when did Sweden announce they were transferring Gripens to Ukraine? They haven't, and the allocation of spare parts has raised eyebrows. Over the weekend, multiple countries announced new military aid packages to Ukraine. There are too many to list in the podcast, which is good news for Ukraine. The full details are included in the situation report. There's more information on how to become a subscriber in the podcast description.
I'm David Knowles, and this is Ukraine, the latest, today.
Yesterday, The Telegraph announced that our friend David Knowles, the producer and voice of The Telegraph's War in Ukraine podcast, died while on vacation in Gibraltar from a heart attack. Knowles was just 32. For over 2 years, Knowles was the internationally recognized English voice for reporting on the Russia-Ukraine war, even as Western interest faded. All of us are deeply saddened to learn of his untimely passing. While the staff at The Telegraph mourns and plans for their next steps, we recognize, as the second most listened to Russia-Ukraine war podcast, we have an even bigger responsibility to report the truth. Because the truth matters. We send our condolences to the journalist community, David's family, and our peers at The Telegraph. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.